and thank you for coming out on this Wednesday evening. I'm Beth McCoy. I'm the proud superintendent for the Dover-Sherborn schools, and I'm also a parent of an 8th grader and a 10th grader in the system, so I have double sets of ears on tonight as we start to think about what college will look like for not only all of our students, but for my kiddos at home. I'd like to thank our panelists for coming out tonight, for all of you taking time away from your families and your busy lives, and we are recording thanks to DSC TV, so for those of us who aren't able to be here in person this evening, or if you want to watch this again or watch this with your student, it'll be available online. So as you know, Dover-Sherborn believes in academic excellence, and roughly 98% of our students leave 12th grade and go on to attend college, which is absolutely excellent. In 2019, we brought together the Academic Innovation Committee, which involved students, educators, administrators, parents, community members, thinking about how is the world outside changing, and what does that mean for K-12 schools? So in this year, we're kind of revisiting the path that we followed in 2019, since it's been 5 years. We've been through a pandemic, and we have many new parents who are either new to the district or new to the idea of college and that conversation. So again, we're looking at research. We're looking at other high-performing schools in the area and internationally. We've asked people in different industries. We had an industry panel about a month ago, and we're asking our college representatives tonight, what skills and competencies do our graduates need for success in college, career, and life in this ever-changing world with AI and all of the technologies at our fingertips? So we'll be listening to you tonight to think about backwards planning. We've heard from the industries the skills that they're looking for in their future employees. We'd love to hear from you what you're looking for your students, so that as a K-12 district, we can continue to think about what we do well and what we can do better. I'd like to thank the administrators here. Denny Conklin's in the corner, assistant superintendent. Ellen Shagnon, our director of guidance, is in the back. And Deborah Kagan, middle school principal now, is here. And Rob Williamson, who is our beloved guidance counselor, is going to be moderating this evening. So I will turn it over to Mr. Williamson to ask questions. There'll probably be time at the end for you all to ask questions of our panelists, but we are going to try to do a hard stop at 7:50 because the library is going to kick us out at 7:59. So thank you again, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody. As Superintendent McCoy mentioned, my name is Rob Williamson. I am one of the counselors at the high school. This is my 12th year working at Dover-Sherborn High School. And I actually also come from a college admissions background. Before I worked at Dover-Sherborn, I was an admissions rep at Brown University. Although that was a lot of time ago. You know, that was... As I said, I've been here for 12 years, so that was a long time ago. And as part of our constant hope to sort of improve our processes and learn from the world around us, as Superintendent McCoy said, I'm really excited to have this panel here so that we can learn more about what comes next. You know, I think a big piece of what we do at the high school is, helping to educate students so that they can go out into the world. And for a lot of those students, that world is you. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all for being here. And thank you all for being here as well. Our first question really is just, I would hope that you could introduce yourself rather than me introducing each of you independently. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what school you work for, your title, and a little bit about your work maybe would be wonderful. And I don't know, why don't we start with Kate? We'll go back.
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Kate Beyer. I'm Associate Director of Missions for Hobart and William Smith Colleges. We're a small private liberal arts school in upstate New York, so I think I'm representing furthest away school this evening. We're right past Syracuse. I've also been with the school 12 years now, so I think we came into this at the same time.
We've literally known each other in all those 12 years.
Time. Yeah, and I'm regionally based for us. So I live locally in Framingham, and part of my role is being regionally based is to be accessible for students and families. So I live out here with you all, and really excited to be here and share some great information with you tonight.
Hi, Hi everyone, my name is Scarlett Bittner. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an admissions counselor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which is of course the flagship state school for the Massachusetts system. I've been in my current role in the Access and Inclusion Committee with admissions for about a year and a half now. So in addition to traveling in this area, reading applications, I also plan a lot of the admitted student events on campus with a focus on underrepresented student populations.
Hi everybody, I'm Brenna St. John. I'm here with College of the Holy Cross. I just started in this role about 8 months ago, so I did admissions work all throughout my 4 years at college, and I'm a graduate of Holy Cross as well. I also oversee all of our senior admission fellows.
Hi everyone. As always, I'm the eldest on this panel. My name is Susan Migliorise. I'm one of the associate directors in the admission office at Boston College. I've been there since 1999. If people saw me hugging, I'm going to do this to you. If people saw me hugging Mr. Conklin, Denny was one of my kids back in the day. I was like, this is weird. So I have been in college admission work for close to 30 years. And my role at Boston College is myriad. I do a lot with the admitted student programming, with our One Merit Scholarship, the Gavelli Presidential Scholars Program. I also work with transfer students, so can talk the gamut of the college admission experience because I'm aged, as I'd like to say.
If you didn't blow up Mr. Conklin's spot, I was going to do that for you. I'm glad you did, so I didn't have to. Excellent. Thank you so much. So our first question is a pretty standard question in these panels. So could you just describe quickly what your admissions process looks like at each of your individual institutions, and just a quick snippet about what you are looking for in your applications, or in your applicants, rather. I don't know. I want to start on the other end, if that works.
Like that one?
Yeah,
sure.
Great.
So the way that our admission process works at Boston College may be different than other schools. And I think all of us will often say when we have these panels, it depends on the school that you're applying to how this all works. But the way that it works at Boston College is we're a single reader system. So that means that when we're making admission decisions, we're not in a committee. And, I don't read an application and then kind of put it up the chain to have the dean make a final decision on it. I make all the decisions on all of my applications. So the way that we do it is that each of us has a particular territory that we review. And some of us have a territory that has just domestic, some of it has domestic and international. And I always let people know this is where your high school is located, not necessarily where you physically live, but where your high school is. So the reason I'm here tonight is I've had Dover-Sherborn for X plus years, I don't know, like 20 plus. So I have the Metro West area, and it's one of the areas that I review and make the decisions on the applications. So I think one of the things that I've explained to people over the years that has really changed in admission is that when I first started back in the late 90s, it was a much less nuanced decision-making process. I'd look at somebody's GPA, I'd look at how many APs they took, and you kind of got a sense of rigor and who was going to be the most competitive applicant. You kind of make decisions solely based on those types of things. Generally now in the applicant pool that we receive at Boston College, the students have done every single thing right. They've done everything right. So it isn't a matter of like, oops, you should have taken more APs. It really becomes about a much more thoughtful process of how a student will thrive in your particular institution's mission and academically. And at Boston College, we are liberal arts oriented, and we're very interdisciplinary in nature. So our students don't just take courses only in their major. They are always taking courses in the liberal arts, and some of them have majors and minors that seem wildly disparate. But those are the kinds of kids that thrive at BC because of how we teach and how our educational system is actually set up. So when I'm making admission decisions, I'm thinking about that all the time. You may be an amazing student, but if all you want to do is your major all day long, you're not going to be really happy at BC. So I'm, very specifically looking for students who are going to thrive in our particular type of academic environment.
Yeah, very similar to BC. We're liberal arts, so we have a really wide range of classes that all students take. So very similar. We're interdisciplinary and have a huge focus on that. Our application process is a little different. We have a double read and then we go into committee. So I read for my territory first, which Dover-Sherborn's in my territory, and then it gets sent off to somebody else to read it, and then we come together in a large group and make that decision of acceptance or not acceptance together. Yeah, we definitely just look for really well-rounded students, someone who, again, isn't interested just in taking classes in their area. We're also not looking for someone who's strictly academic driven. We're looking for someone who's involved in a wide range of activities and extracurriculars, both in and out of school, and just someone who really will appreciate taking all of those courses, making connections across disciplines, having hard, challenging conversations, and really just furthering education in a beneficial way to them in the community.
I feel like this is going to be my constant kind of line tonight, is that UMass is going to be a lot different from some of these other schools. So for basic starters, how to apply in terms of our application process, we are on the Common Application. So that is something that you will start working on and filling out. It usually opens up over the summer. We also have a small supplemental section with that. So that is what we are looking at. We use what's called a holistic read to read applications, which means we don't just look at GPA and automatically say yes or no. We look at everything you submit, your letters of recommendation, your essay, your extracurriculars, any additional information you share with us. We do look at your transcript to see if you are challenging yourself appropriately, if there's an increase in rigor, those kinds of things. But we try and get a full picture of who a student is as a student, but also as a person before we make a decision. And that's a process we've had for quite some time now. It's not something new we're doing. But I think it really kind of speaks to the type of students that do tend to thrive at UMass Amherst, which is, once again, we are looking for students that will fit into our community, be really active on campus. So we have a very large campus, so we want students to feel involved. So we are looking for involvement in school, in the community, even just in like a smaller group of friends, but you are doing community service or you have varied interests that you would find on our campus as well.
And we're also liberal arts, so also a focus on interdisciplinary and taking a variety of classes. For us, you don't apply into a major or school or program. Everyone comes undecided, so we give you 2 years to explore our curriculum. So I think the first thing I always talk about what we're looking for is someone who's open-minded and okay with that model of exploring. We also do a holistic review. So I will say, I think a lot of us would say academics are really important, right? We need to see that you are capable of doing the work and you'll be successful in our community, but it's not the only thing that we're looking at. I do think your point about challenging yourself appropriately and taking rigor appropriately, that's a really good thing to mention. For us, we're not trying to compare students at the same school. What did one take versus the other? It's looking at you in the context of your program. Did you increase that rigor or did you take on things? We work in a partner reading system as well. So once again, this is my territory. I'm the first reader for this area. And then my partner second reads, and then files go to committee or to our VP, depending on if it's pretty clear admit or if it's a file that might need a little bit more discussion. So we're kind of a mix on that. I think other than the open-mindedness, what we're looking for, like I said, students that challenge themselves, rigorous curriculum, students with a clear passion or interest. I'm representing the smallest school here tonight too, so we're a small community. So it's really important, yes, that you'll be able to handle it academically at our campus, but also what kind of person are you? What are you passionate about? What do you want to be involved with? So as we're reading your application, we're trying to figure out all those little pieces and see how they're going to translate to our community. The recommendations are really big for us too in telling us a little bit more about that. So what does your counselor, what do your teachers say about you as a person, as a student, as a community member, and how is that going to translate to our world? And just so curious, resourceful, persistent, I think are also things that we're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As I'm asking the next question, I will certainly not find it rude if those of you standing in the back, there's a seat up front here.
We can bring some chairs.
Feel free. We can bring some more chairs in. I won't find it rude as I'm asking a question, so please feel free if you'd like to sneak up front. So, Susan, you got at this a little bit, but I'm wondering how the process has changed or evolved in the past few years. I think since I've started working at Dover-Sherborn, and I think since several of you have started working in admissions, we've gone through a whole lot of change. We had a pandemic, we've had influxes of applications from all over the country, all over the world, and we, in our office at least, and I would imagine in the parent and student community, are curious as to how you feel like things have changed in your world in the past little bit, in the landscape, and to the extent possible, if you can sort of look out 5, 10, 15 years in the future, are there any changes or sea changes that you see coming on the horizon as well? And we don't need to go necessarily down the aisle, but we can maybe popcorn if anybody has any thoughts on changes that they've seen or can anticipate.
I can start off. I haven't seen too many changes as I just started this year. I know Holy Cross is really working on just getting out there more and exploring different territories more. So I think that's something we're really prioritizing, is kind of just diversifying where our students are coming from geographically, which is really important. So I travel out to Arizona, but I also am in charge of Nevada and New Mexico. But we have people going everywhere. So I think that's something that's really important to us. But again, I can't speak on the actual application side of it, just let's say a bit of that. But yeah.
In my 30 years of doing this has been probably the most sea change I've seen in the last couple of years, this year in particular, with a lot of outside factors. Number one, the SCOTUS ruling on affirmative action. So that radically changed how colleges were utilizing race. Now it's a race-neutral process for admission. So that's been, a radical shift from what schools had done in the past. Since the pandemic, most places went test optional. The majority of my career, I was looking at testing and have not for the last few years. And then I think everybody probably may be aware that a number of schools have announced that they're going to go back to testing next year, particularly Dartmouth came out with that. So that's been a real change for universities. I think there were, don't want to speak for everybody, I know some folks were always test optional, but a lot of us were not. So how did that, that certainly impacted everything. And while this is not admission necessarily related, all the FAFSA stuff this year, the fact that it's been delayed and how that's affecting people's deadlines. So May 1st generally is the deadline that schools use for everybody to tell which colleges where they're going. And because of the FAFSA kind of delays, some schools have altered their May 1 deadline. That's going to be a huge impact that none of us even really know how that's all going to work. So this year has been probably, in my experience, the oddest year that the least predictable, I would say, year that we've all had. So don't know what 5 years from now what that's all going to mean, but in the moment right now, there's a lot that has changed compared to even just 2 or 3 years ago with what we've been doing.
Yeah, retweet.
It's like, yeah,
retweet. Yeah, it's been a weird year.
Yeah.
We're a school that was test optional since 2006, so that wasn't a big change for us. We had kind of shifted thinking that standardized testing isn't always the best indicator of a student's success. I will, what you were talking about before, the lens, I think, that we read, and it is a lot more nuanced now. And I think when I started was very much like, how strong is that program? How many APs or advanced classes do they have? And what's the GPA? And those were the big factors that we were making decisions. And now we're dealing with students that have been through a pretty crazy time, right? And so we have to change our lens and how we're reading students and what they've gone through and try and figure out, okay, where are they at? And do we think they're prepared and they'll be successful? So I definitely think that we read with a little bit, of a different lens. SCOTUS definitely, I think a lot of us have added different questions or ways to get at information that we cannot have, on the application anymore, trying to recruit as best of a diverse class as we can. I also think, there are less and less students that are going to be going to college, right? We're at an admissions cliff, right? So we are going to be competing for less and less high school students. So I think that that's going to be interesting and probably change how some of us, so it's kind of recruit and admissions and the reading process. And I think people are also going to get creative and maybe come up with things like alternatives to essays. Like talk about like doing videos, or we actually do a lot more emphasis on interviews now. When I applied, barely anyone interviewed, and now we strongly recommend interviews for our applicants. So once again, I think that's trying to get a better sense of the whole applicant, and you can't see everything on the Common App. So I'll be curious to see. Yeah, but it's hard to predict in 5 years, what else will change.
But your point, Kate, about the demographic drop, particularly in New England, is huge. Not in certain other parts of the South and Southwest, there's not going to be this demographic drop, but it's huge for colleges. Yeah. And if people haven't really been aware, there have been a number of colleges that have closed. So that's out in the landscape too, that some of the smaller schools right around here really have had to shutter. So that's definitely something people don't think about. You're just like, how do I get in? How do I get in? But like on the college side, that's one of the things that schools are struggling with, is making sure they maintain a population so that they can stay open.
That's why we're all fleeing to those areas that she's talking about. We're all trying to pivot and figure out where else are we going to get students. Yeah. Exactly.
And here's where UMass is different. So the biggest change that I have noticed since I started working as an admissions counselor about 5 years ago at UMass is the amount that we have increased our applications, the amount that our competitiveness has increased. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we are not the same school we were back in the early 2000s, back in the 80s, any of those things. So a lot of students applying now are in part going off of what the UMass was that their parents attended, that their counselors attended, and that's not who we are anymore. We have started getting a lot of national renown for some of our programs, which have then become increasingly competitive. And something we noticed with the pandemic was a lot of students were starting to say, hey, you know what? Actually, I think the state school that's cheaper is going to be the better option. And so we had a huge influx of applications and students who decided to enroll that we did not expect, because students, sometimes we accept students and we know that they are simply not going to come to UMass because they get offers from the Ivies and they want to go there or other private colleges. And a lot of those students started saying yes to us because of this recognition that we're getting, the strength of some of our programs. And so that has been a massive shift for us, is how can we try and accommodate, hopefully in the next 5-10 years, a larger incoming class, so we can kind of scale back that competitiveness, because we have gotten quite competitive over the past 5-10 years. And so I think that's been the biggest shift for us. And so hopefully, in 5-10 years, we will have been able to get more campus buildings, more housing, those kinds of things, so we can go back to increasing our incoming class, have the resources to support them, and become a little bit less competitive for our in-state students again.
I think that's something we're seeing too. This was actually a record-breaking year with applications for us, and I think due to how much travel we really do. So I'm kind of am curious to see how the next 5-10 years will play out, if we will see more applications or see a decrease because it is becoming more competitive. And so I'm just curious too, see how it's going to play out.
I'm going to go a little off script because, Kate, one of the statements that you made sort of made me wonder. You talked a little bit about sort of the test, when you guys all went test optional, sort of the shift away from that. And, there is sort of this worry, I think, in our community specifically, but I think in a lot of communities, that if that's happening, then there's going to be more of a focus on, how many APs, how many honors classes, so where does that focus go if you don't have that broad sort of comparison from school to school? And I actually have no idea how you're going to answer this question, but I'm curious as to, especially those schools who have just gone test optional recently, do you feel like there's a higher emphasis on that sort of a thing, or is the answer just more nuanced in other ways too?
I think for us, because we have done this holistic read for so long, test scores were always just a component. For us, it was never a make or break kind of deal. Now that we're test optional, a lot of students aren't sending them in, so we put a little bit more emphasis on the parts that they do send in. One of those parts is, of course, your GPA and your high school transcript, but it's not like all of our extra emphasis goes to just that in lieu of test scores. Some students are still choosing to send in test scores, and so we continue to take it as a part of the overall holistic review of their application. So for us, it has changed a little bit, but not kind of to the extent that I think some colleges might have changed.
I think one of the things that I totally agree, everything was always holistic. I always said to people, like, SATs were never the be all end all, in our process. What families don't necessarily always realize is, I think what's coming from high schools these days is a lot less than when, I'm going to say we, because I'm sure I'm older than all of you, when we went to high school, right? There's almost nobody gives you a class rank. Almost everybody unweights grades. So at least the territories that I review. So I get grade, but it's not weighted. So there's no sense of like, what was the more challenging course, right? So I have my experience of 30 years of doing this, of understanding how competitive a student is within their academic environment. Because the worst thing you can ever do to anybody is admit them to somewhere that they're going to fail and that they're not going to, be successful academically. But I think, having done this as long as I have, I feel that I have gotten less information than I did in 1999 about what students are actually getting out of their high school experience. So it has meant relying a lot more on teacher recommendations. Just did a teacher rec workshop at Needham yesterday, the day before, I don't remember. Because that's really important now. Like in the 90s, teachers pretty much wrote the same thing. Now I really have to get stuff from teachers. I really have to understand what's going on in the classroom because I don't have an easy data point anymore. And that's not a negative thing, but when you add that on top of schools getting 100,000 applications a year, that adds to the kind of pressure that I think people are under to make good decisions for kids. Ultimately, I worked for many, many, many years for John Mahoney, who is kind of a legend in the world of college admission, and he was always like, no matter what, we are educators and counselors first. And I live by that. Like, all I want to do is make sure that the students are having the best possible experience they can have through the admission process. I always say to kids, I'm like, this should be fun. Like, it was fun in the 80s. People sent you brochures, and you're like, this is cool. I can get out of my town. I can go somewhere else. Like, it was fun. Now, all I see is stress. Like kids, like, and like, it really, like, this can still be fun. So we try very much in our office is to be educators first and to make these kinds of decisions that we think are going to benefit the kids the most. So
I think to that point, too, there's so much pressure is put on kids to send their test scores to test optional schools. We've been test optional since 2005, so roughly the same time frame. And kids still ask, like, should I send them? Mm-hmm. And it's completely optional. And I think it's just like that pressure's on there. Like, you see it as an option to send it, but it doesn't matter. So
I think it's a trick question.
Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter if it's bad phrase to use, but it really is just personal preference. If you're a good test taker, send them. If you're not, don't send them. They're not going to be the end-all, be-all deciding factor. And we look at everything. Like, we rely on teacher recs a lot, grades and GPAs, and we don't compare kids from other schools. So it really is just about that student you're reading in the moment and who they are as a person, as a student, brother, sister, niece, nephew, just who they are. So I think it's a lot of pressure is put on students these days to have like that perfect application with all those pieces in there.
Yes.
When sometimes you can leave out that test score and it will be okay.
I would throw this out there as a caveat just quickly because for schools that have done test optional for a long time, a lot of us just went in 2019. Couple things. If you can find them, look at everybody's mid 50% range from 2019 and then look at it now. It is 80 points higher, probably, right? So that, like, for even just the mental health of kids, I'm always like, because I literally have kids line up to me and be like, my SAT, and their SAT scores are in the top 5% of this country, and they have told themselves that they are a horrible test taker because they have gotten a really warped view of what testing is. So that's one piece of all of this is to, try to put this in a positive framework. The other piece is to legitimately ask schools, particularly those that haven't been test optional that long, like, what's the difference in your accept rate between kids who submitted and kids who didn't? We're part of a national clearinghouse. There's a marked difference. Mm-hmm. So I think you should feel empowered to ask these kind of hard questions to colleges. Mm-hmm. You really should. Like, nobody's. I shouldn't speak for anybody, but I don't think people are writing down, they asked me a hard question. But you need to know this information. I think it's really important to ask it when you go out there.
Excellent. I love having these panels because it makes me feel like I'm telling people all the right things. It's terrific. I will sort of, before we take a half a step back from the admissions world, sort of just reiterate that, there are parts of this process especially that can and should be fun, right? Like probably sitting on a Saturday morning and taking the SAT for most people isn't like a fun experience. And like, I get that. But there are parts of it, like, exploring and going on college visits with a parent and walking around and saying, hey, if I was here, like, that could be my dorm, that could be my Starbucks. Like, that can be really exciting, right? So my advice to students all the time, and I'm going to say it to you all and whoever's on DC TV watching me now, embrace that, right? Like, that part can be an adventure, and that can sort of help everything come alive. And even thinking about, like, what am I going to write my college essay about? Like, in the end, it should be something that you're kind of excited to be thinking about and processing and writing. And I get that sitting down and writing a little bit of an essay may not be fun for everybody either, but at least the subject matter should be something meaningful, right? And it doesn't have to be a huge stressor in your life, right? That's generally like my number one message to everybody. Some of them take me up on it, and some of them do not. All right, so we're going to take a little bit of a step back from the admissions world. At Dover-Sherborn High School, we are regularly looking at sort of our own practices. I think with the introduction of AI and ChatGPT and things, and even just like sort of just the stress that seems to be going on in high schools, we're really evaluating, how much homework we're giving our students, how many tests that we give, what does our exam week look like. And a big reason, I think, from a lot of teachers' perspective is, we want to make sure that they are prepared for the college level. So a question that we have had constantly as a high school is sort of, what does class look like at the high school? Like, what does learning look like in a college classroom? And has that shifted at all, with the introduction to AI? Are there still a lot of classes where it's, a test every so often, or are there lots of papers, or I'm sure the answer is it depends, but have you noticed any sort of overall shifts in learning at the college level?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I think, especially with the liberal arts here, I think we'd all say we're trying to develop the soft skills more, right? So communication, teamwork, adaptability. I think it used to be a lot linear, right? Where it was like you go and study one thing and that was your focus and that was going to be your job, and that's just not the world that we live in anymore. So I think we're trying to be innovative in the areas that we offer our students. Interdisciplinary, as some of us mentioned. So I always think about our environmental studies program, where I think people think of that as just like the science program. But for us, it's classes in natural and social sciences, but there are a lot of cross-listed classes too that we ask students to get skills and knowledge to solve problems, right? And think about the world in a different way. Like, I wrote a couple down because I did not take many science classes. Geography of garbage, politics of climate change, morality and self-interest. So I think we're trying to provide our students a bigger toolkit, right? A bigger knowledge base, and instead of being so focused on one thing. But definitely, I love to say the problem solving, critical thinking skills, right? But those are so important. Discourse, you mentioned, Brenna, like discourse and having difficult conversations, or being able to be in a room and talk with people that have different opinions and be able to learn and be respectful in that sort of space. And also like the hands-on opportunities. Even from like when I graduated college, I can't believe what an emphasis there is on experiential learning now, and like the internships, the study abroad, research opportunities, community-based research, like all of these things that weren't as much of a thing when I was a student. So I think that that's really how class has shifted in our space, and I'm guessing it's pretty similar.
Yes, definitely. I just left the college classroom. But something at like Holy Cross really does is like have those conversations in class that might push you outside your comfort zone, make you think a little differently. We again like that interdisciplinary focus on that hands-on learning. Something I really appreciated was that they really let you kind of pick what you wanted to focus on. Like an assignment would be so open-ended, not like, and you can just focus on what you want to study and what your passions are, which I really loved and appreciated because it allowed me to explore my interest in a specific lens, even if it might not necessarily go together conventionally, which I really appreciated. So I think just that, and we have a huge focus on hands-on learning. We have CBL components to our classes, community-based learning, where students go into the Worcester community and go to the Worcester Public Library and help people do taxes. They go into guidance counseling offices. They go to the Worcester Art Museum and help with archiving. So just like really getting cool experiences you might not traditionally get. We're huge on academic internship program. The Career Center is a great resource for our students. Summer research, we send kids down to DC, study abroad, just really taking what you're learning and putting it out in the real world and kind of having that hands-on approach and changing the way learning is traditionally seen.
I would echo all of that, and then just add, we do a lot of co-disciplinary and co-taught courses now. We have a liberal arts core curriculum, I'm sure a lot of you guys do too, and our core, for the first year students, we teach classes called Enduring Questions and Complex Problems that change constantly. So the faculty have to come up with new classes and they have to co-teach them with somebody similar discipline, disparate, whatever. But it has to be something that is really relevant to what's going on today. And I think two Jesuit schools right here, but that's one of the, part of the mission of the institution is that your education should be about using your gifts and talents to affect change in the world. And so if you're teaching in a very siloed kind of niche way, which a lot of academics enjoy because they're experts in particular fields, we want to push the faculty out of their comfort zones and say, hey, teach a course on your brain on theater. And so we had a neuroscience professor and a theater professor teach a particular class where they were looking at kind of how your brain processes emotion. And does it change if you're acting? So like classes like that are always rotating, that's definitely new. And, you have to have faculty that are willing to kind of move in that direction with you.
I think as a larger school, our shift has been a bit slower than some of the liberal arts colleges, and it does definitely depend a lot on the course you're taking, the field it falls into. We have started putting a much larger emphasis on that interdisciplinary learning, those hands-on experiences like all of my colleagues here. We do still have your traditional lecture hall kind of classes, especially for our intro level classes that do tend to fit into what most might think of as your college classroom lecture hall with a professor. About, I want to say 10, 15 years ago, though, one of the things we started doing with those big lecture hall classes is they meet 3 times a week. And so Monday and Wednesday are in the lecture hall with the professor. Friday is a smaller breakout group with like 20 to 30 students. And that's where you get that discussion-based hands-on learning to complement the big lecture hall style to give students one who learn better that way, that opportunity, but also to kind of keep enforcing these communication skills and things like that.
Yeah. The other thing I'd add, just and I think this came out of COVID, is it's a more empathetic learning environment. I'd say now, I think we're trying to hold students accountable, but there are more layers of support than there were when I think about when I was a student there. And it's this idea of like learning and growing through your mistakes and supporting students through that. So we're not going to like totally baby you or handhold you, but I think I feel like people are more empathetic and provide a little bit more different support now than they used to.
So I guess then the follow-up question to that is really how that translates to sort of the high school side of things. Like, what are the qualities that you see? And I guess this is sort of bringing together the answers to the last question and the admission side of things. What are the qualities that you see in high school students that make them successful in that learning environment where, they can maybe learn and grow through mistakes or sort of thrive in an interdisciplinary sort of place? Like, what could or should we be doing as a high school and sort of broader across the country and world? What are the things that you feel like really help students thrive and be successful in that new world?
I think part of it is like the intrinsic motivation that comes with learning something new that you think is cool, and how to find that in the courses that you don't care about. To be very candid. I was a theater major. Like, I'm a very arts, social science focused person. I had to teach myself how to get through math and science courses, right? And once I figured out how to find like that little switch and turn it on to, even if I wasn't interested in it, I could still find some spark of joy in learning that material. That's when I really started to flourish as a student. And so I think that's it's a hard to cultivate quality in a lot of high schools, but that is something that will serve you leaps and bounds, not just in college, but for the rest of your life, I think.
I think, too, there's such a mindset that college is competitive and like getting in is competitive and you have to be competitive to succeed. Holy Cross is a super collaborative school. I'm sure every other school on this panel is super collaborative, both in the classroom, outside the classroom. Whether you're a student, a teacher, like everyone's working together to make sure you succeed. If you're not in class, the student next to you is going to give you their notes and make sure you're doing well and checking in on you. So I think there's like that mindset switch too. Like you need to be open-minded to helping others, but also not just so focused on making sure you succeed, but helping others out there too. I think that's something everyone up here could probably agree with their school.
I think too, one of my students said a few years ago that the only time he felt successful in high school was when he was stressed. And I was like, that was like a gut punch to hear that. But I mean, I feel like I see it. I'm not in high schools all the time, right? But we're all in them a decent amount. And you can see it in all of these kids. And I think one of the things that just naturally happens once they get out of the pressure cooker that is to get into college and then you're actually in college is that you can kind of just enjoy learning. So if there's any way to try to like culturally cultivate that in high school, I think it's really hard. But that is one of the things that I have seen is that they're more reflective, and some of that is maybe the Jesuit nature, like liberal arts nature, but there's a lot of reflection that happens in our classes. So we have professors, even a business class that will start the first 5 minutes of class and they'll do a Jesuit thing called an examen, which basically you kind of sit down and you think about what went well this week, what didn't go so well, and how do you want to move forward kind of thing. And I see that take some of the angst out of kids. So little things like that, if you can throw into high school classrooms, I think would really help them.
Yeah, I would say just emphasis on communicating well, definitely in writing, but also depends on the school they're applying to. But for schools like us, right, we're talking a lot about discussion based, right, in smaller classes. I came from a larger public high school, so coming to Hobart was like a little bit of a shock for me, and the fact that I was being like asked to contribute all the time and share like my thoughts and feelings and perspective all the time. So I think preparing students for that and just being comfortable having those discussions, and it's okay to disagree, and how can we do that like in a thoughtful manner. Interdisciplinary classes like in the humanities, I know high schools are offering more of these things. The other like plug, like Wellesley down the road does the Evolutions program, which is interdisciplinary and project based. So not only offering opportunities to let students dip their toes in that kind of work, because they're going to do a lot of it at our schools, but then I'd say also please assure them that that doesn't reflect poorly on them.
Yeah.
There's so many students who say, I wanted to take it, but then I'm not going to have the AP, and you all are going to think that like, what does that say about my schedule? Or then they have to like, their schedule's out of whack because they have to take like U.S. history senior year because they couldn't take it junior year because they were in evolutions, and just reassuring them that we're thoughtful with their application. We know what those programs are. We read the school profile, and so we know why they're making those choices, and that their schedule might look a little bit different, but we really value the experience that they've had with that.
And what's Concord Carlisle have? Don't they have Rivers
and Revolution?
Rivers and Revolution.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Dover-Sherborn is underway.
Yes, awesome.
Part of it is very
good.
nice.
That's great.
I know I'm like hearing this thing like, ooh, I love that you're saying
Yeah.
So to that point, I mean, is there anything specific about Dover-Sherborn that those of you especially who have been kind of working with our district for a while, that you either appreciate, or any recommendations that you have in general that you see? I think those are two good examples at other schools where they have some really neat, innovative things going on that I think we are trying to not emulate, I'll say to make our own. But is there anything else like that you see like that we could add, or things that you feel like we do really well already? And that's a hard question.
I think the teacher recs here are helpful. And again, I just read, like 12 or something and this is not Bay High School, right? So I think the teachers here do a really good job of telling the students stories, which I find incredibly helpful when I'm making admission decisions. It isn't just a list of platitudes, but I actually get a sense of who they are as a student. So I'm very grateful for that.
And the Counselor Recs are also great.
Yeah, oh, well, yes.
Slip me some money later. No, I would agree. I mean, it's a smaller school, so your students are fortunate, right? Like, it's a little bit easier to spend a little more time on those recommendations, or they might get to know students a little bit better. But we do take the recommendations seriously, and we do read them all. So I think the students have great initiative here. I've always had great conversations with students. They reach out. It's typically not the parents, so that's awesome, right? It's the student themselves asking for an interview, or sorry, I missed you when I was at the high school, but I am still interested in your school. So I think you prepare them well to communicate with us and to own the college process, which is really nice because that's not always the case with some of the students in the schools that we're working with. So we appreciate that.
Awesome. All right. I will say I was just looking at some data yesterday. We had 56 different faculty members writing letters of recommendation this year, and for a school that's not much larger than that, to be honest, I was pretty excited to see that our students really connected with that many of our faculty members and felt like this was one of two people that I feel like knows me really well, and that, I don't know, that made me feel really good about what we're doing. Is there anything else sort of in this larger topic of admissions, but also sort of where admissions and college and high school is and should be going, that you'd want to add before we open it up to any questions, if anyone has any in the audience?
Just keep, emphasizing the balance piece too, which I think even before COVID, I think we are having this shift in this area, especially where students were really stressed out and the high schools were trying to respond, and you had all these like mental health groups popping up and a lot more emphasis on that, which is really great. But I think as much like balance as you can provide them and giving them time, like no homework nights, or like you said, just looking at your exam schedule and making sure that students aren't getting too stressed out, because we don't want them burnt out by the time that they get to us, right? We want them like active and excited, and like you said, this is a fun process, and it's a lot of, when we meet students, it's still a lot of this. So anything that we can do to help with that.
I think just generationally, they care so much about this planet. Like, I hear that constantly, right? Do we not hear this constantly? Like coursework in that direction, it might elicit more from them. At least that's what I keep hearing and reading.
Yeah.
I forget who mentioned it, but like going to the campus and like picturing yourself, like it should be fun. Like you should be able to go to the college campus. It also looks good on your application if you had a visit and you came to the campus. That's something we look at. But just remind them it is fun. You got to go to a college campus, maybe even miss school to come to the college visit. So just keeping like the fun of the process, I think, is important.
All right. Are there any questions from the audience? Sure.
You talked a lot about the optional SAT score. Is it helpful for someone to get a good score, and do you think it's worthwhile? Because there's some studying involved in that amongst everything. Do you think it's beneficial for a student to, and he's good at, he or she's good academically, but for them to spend the time to get a good SAT score? I mean, will it really help them? I know it's just one of many things. Like, if a person was your child, would you be recommending they study and take that SAT multiple times to get the best score possible?
I think we're headed back in that direction, to be honest. I think that's what I've been, parents keep going, I just want to know what to do, right? Like, do we study for the test or do we not? And I mean, honestly, with Dartmouth, I can't speak for people who've been test optional for a long time, because that's a different process than schools that had required testing and then went test optional because we were in the middle of a pandemic, right? So what most of us have done is we've done a lot of research and looked at the kids who submitted testing and looked at the kids who didn't and looked to see how they performed while they've been at your school. And most of us have found a difference. So I think, I can't speak for what we're going to be test optional for next year, but Dartmouth just went back. Who else just went back? Brown just went back. So
Yale.
Yale went back. So when the Ivies go, I do think the trickle-down effect occurs. So if you're thinking in that area, you're thinking those types of schools, it probably wouldn't hurt to do some test prep if you were planning to do that. Had this been 2018 and you were going to do test prep, then it probably doesn't hurt. My gut in all these years is that I think a lot of the schools that went test optional because of the pandemic are probably going to ease their way back into testing. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I think that's probably what's going to happen.
For next year, would you, would BC be looking like?
I can tell you our admit rate for kids who, there was a difference for sure. There was, yeah. For our admitted student population, 68% of them submitted testing.
I think it depends on the type of student too, because we've been test optional for so long. I think where it really helps us get a sense of a student is the one that's more of a fence student, right? Or maybe a little of a late bloomer, or for students that are like very solid academically, great. It's great that you have high test scores. It's going to help our average, right? But I think it's skewed, as we've been saying, right? We went from being about 50% test scores submitted or not. Now we're about 20%, post-COVID. So when you think about that smaller number, and then the kids that are submitting, that are getting these but for a student where we're still trying to see some of that momentum, or they're still growing and that kind of upward trend is starting, then those strong test scores can help, right? Because that helps us feel a little bit better and see a little bit more of the potential. So I think it depends on the student.
I will say too, I know there's been some data out there about how students kind of hit a threshold with the testing at some point. No matter how much test prep they do for those standardized tests, they will hit a wall at some point. So taking it 8 times is maybe not the best use of time. Maybe 2 or 3, and then kind of let it be.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what most people were doing prior to the pandemic, right? They take it a couple times, get through, and most places super scored.
Yep.
Go back to that.
Sure.
Just one question about your assessment of kids who are ready for your college. In the absence of test scores, what do you look out for to tell if a kid is appropriate for individual colleges?
I mean, rigor of the program that they're in.
Yeah.
And some of it's just knowing your high schools too. I always try to explain the value of being old is I've been doing this forever. I know teachers by name at high schools. I have relationships with high schools. I understand how your high school works, because I think sometimes that's what feels fearful for families is how do you know the grading here is different than the grading at the school down the street? And because how we do it, that we read by territory, is I know all of that. I understand that, and I'm contextually understanding how your student is performing at that particular school. So looking at, the level of difficulty of the course they took, how well they did in it, what was offered, all of that. But then the extra layer, I think, becomes is how does that actually work within your institution, and how the student is going to then thrive at your particular school. And that's where our variances, I think, come, right? Because all of us are looking for something a little bit different for each of the kids that is attending our institution. And that's, I always tell students, some of this is completely and utterly out of your control, right? It just is. How many people decide to apply to a school? That NYU got 110,000 applications. There's nothing you can do about that, but you love NYU, so you're going to apply, right? That's how this all goes. That's part of all of this. There's no set thing about it all. So institutional priorities, how many applications schools get, all of that's out of your control. What you can control, I always think for kids, is all the things that you do in high school, yes, but most importantly, that every school that you apply to on your list you actually like, that you really like, and you can see yourself there. And there do not need to be 40 of them at all. There's 6 worked in the day, and I think it still probably can, 6 to 8. That you actually like every single school on your list, because then when you get the decisions around this time, you'll be happy. Because you see yourself fit. So there's a lot you can control in this. The stuff you can't, you got to just kind of,
Yeah. For us, the application's read the exact same way, whether you send your test score or not. If you send it, we put it in your application, like consider it as well, but as everyone said, it's not a deciding factor ever. So for every student, we'll look at your GPA, grades, transcript, extracurriculars, teacher recs, essay, all of it, and then we'll look at your test score too. And like we've accepted plenty of kids that had really high test scores, but we've also seen kids who had really high test scores that might not have necessarily the grades we're looking for, or just good grades. So it just really varies student to student who ascends their score and who doesn't. And I always like to tell students, if you feel proud of your score, send it. And if it's something you're not so sure about as representing who you are as a student, just don't send it. And it's not going to be held against you no matter what. Even if you send your score and it's not in that threshold we typically see, you're not automatically kicked out of the pile. Like, oh, you didn't get that whatever score we like to see, you're out. So it just really is personal preference for the student and how they feel about their score. But I always tell you, if you feel proud about it and it's something you would be like, yeah, I did a good job, go ahead and show us.
Yeah, and I think this is where the recommendations can be really helpful too, right? Spending time in reading and hearing from that teacher in particular. What were they like as a student in class? What was their participation like? Did they struggle a little bit? I'm going to tell you all, we like to read about a little struggle. We like to read about a little bit of a challenge, right? Because that's another skill that we're looking for. We don't want a student necessarily to get to our campus who's never struggled at all. And then what happens if they do struggle on our campus? They don't have the skills. They don't know how to ask for help. They don't know the resources. So we're looking at all the different pieces of the letter too. A lot of us can read between the lines. You know, we've been doing this long enough, and we'll get little bits from those too and see like, oh yes, like this seems like an indicator that the student's going to be a good fit or they're going to be successful.
Back here.
Thank you for coming tonight. Can you talk to us about, other than networking, how do you advise students to look for their schools, the different personalities in schools? Like, how do they get a sense of that other than mom went here, neighbor went here, guidance counselor knows this person? How do we open up that box?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I think one of the great things that has come out of COVID and having to accommodate for the online sphere is that so many schools and colleges now have extensive online programming. So if your student is interested in a school in California and you don't want to fly to California to actually go walk around that campus, they have virtual tours, they have virtual information sessions. They're able to meet with current students and tour guides and maybe faculty over Zoom and talk with them about their programs and the campus and their experiences. And so I think that's one really great way to start connecting with those schools you're interested in.
Yeah, something my parents had me do was just write down everything I thought I wanted in a school. And I was like, this seems like such a silly task, but it actually helped a lot. And then we could go in and search schools that are small liberal arts schools, and a whole list came up, and that's primarily what I would look at, or just really whatever. Just like writing it down, like putting it into words helped a lot. And again, we offer virtual info sessions, virtual tours, tons of virtual programs, virtual interviews. Even if you're not 100% sure, even just interviewing and taking this opportunity to ask any questions you may have that you might not find on the website, or you might want to ask face-to-face and not just in an email. So just the virtual programming is huge, but even just writing down things you might look for in a school is super helpful, at least for me in this whole process.
I think too, like going to a college fair or something like that and just getting to like see the options out there, and even just like taking a walk up and down the aisles and looking at what pictures catch your eye. And the thing is too, like we are all here to help. We want to help. If you come up to us and ask us a question about, I know I want to study this and we don't have it, I know 3 or 4 schools that do, and I will happily send you that way. And I think I speak for all of us when I'm like, yeah, it'd be great if you fell in love with our school and came, but we're a giant school. It's not for everyone. I'm so aware of that. And so if that's not the kind of environment you're looking for in college, let me help you figure out what is and send you on that pathway to then hopefully find things that are more in tune with your interests and what you're looking for.
Yeah. And to your point, like try and as much as you can. Doesn't matter where other people are applying. Doesn't matter what the ranking says. Doesn't say who's the best this, that. That doesn't mean it's the best for your child. So trying as much as you can to push a lot of that aside and encourage them to explore and find their own path. And that school might be the best fit for them. I think we'd all encourage that as well.
I'd also encourage just sort of, from my standpoint, listen to them, right? You know, I think over the years I've had too many students in my office saying, well, I'm really interested in this, but Dad says I should do this. And that can be really challenging for them, right? You know, they're at a point in their lives where they're trying to be independent and their own people, but they still need you, right? And they still care a whole lot about you and your opinions. And you can have opinions for sure, but make sure that your opinions remain that and that you leave space for them to have thoughts and feelings too, right? And I think that that's very important in this process, because, you know, they're the ones who's going to go live there for however many years, right? So making sure you're leaving space for them in the process. Yeah, over here.
Thank you for putting this together, by the way. I echo the sentiment from before. Building on that, if you have, and full disclosure, I grew up in Europe. I went to college in the UK. Very different way of going about doing things.
Yeah.
I think of a spectrum in parenting style from completely hands-off to what we call over here helicoptering parent. I've heard two things. I think you, Kate, mentioned, oh, fantastic, you actually recommend your kids to talk to us directly, not themselves. And you just said something to the effect of, oh, Dad tells me to go do X. That could be me. And you should really listen to them, right? So I guess, you know, what is some advice that you could provide us as parents as we try to find ourselves? Where is it that we want to sit in that spectrum? Just to keep ourselves in check, to fit the curve with regards to whatever it is that schools are looking for, evolving towards, and what are things that you would really advise us not to do for sure? Like, okay, you were very clear about something that was, you know, a red flag for you, and you were clear about, you know, I see all these kids struggling with this. So what are some other things that you think that we ought to keep in mind with the best of our intentions when we're trying to help our kids?
I think one thing is making sure communication comes from the students, that they're reaching out with a question, having it come from them, even if you're sitting there helping them write the email. It just shows, like, it helps them learn this process, like how you reach out to someone in a more professional way. So I think I always appreciate when I get student emails. Of course, I'll answer parent emails, parent calls, but hearing it from the student's voice too makes it feel a little more personal and helps build that connection with that student, especially if they do end up coming to the college or really are interested. I think that's something I always look for. I think there is a good balance between being too hands-on and too hands-off. Like, I left a college tour my parents thought I'd really like because I just didn't like it. Like, after the information session, I was like, you know what, I don't want to even go on the tour. I can't see myself. And they're like, okay, like, we'll leave. They thought I would love it, and I didn't. So I just think it kind of depends on, like, I think being involved is good, but I think in, like, being totally hands-off isn't necessarily helpful to the student because it can feel isolating through this whole process because, like you said, like mentioned, they need you and they need your help because they are 17, 18 years old going through this crazy change of moving away from home. But I think there is a fine line between being overly involved and being underly involved.
Yeah, I think a good rule of thumb that I hear people talk about a lot on these panels is make a designated time to talk about college stuff and don't have it be all the time, right? So, like, some families say, like, all right, Sunday's college day, and that's when we're going to, like, check in about, like, where you at with your spreadsheet and how you're feeling about schools or what kind of deadlines are coming up or what do we need to be on top of. So I think it provides great space for the communicating, and then I think everyone's, like, kind of on the same page where they know the expectation, and then it doesn't feel like every night we're talking about it at dinner and you're hounding me and you're asking me questions or whatever. So I think it creates less stress for the parents and for the student, right? Because you've set the expectation, and it may vary depending on your household or how you want to do it. But I think that's a good rule of thumb that a lot of people follow.
Mm-hmm. I just would throw in there that I think parents are less helicopter than they were like 15 years ago, honestly. When I think about phone volume and stuff, like, we released decisions on Thursday, so almost a week ago, and I didn't get a single phone call. My phone, like, the next day, you'd be like, here we go. And they'd be screaming at you, and who are you? And my mother would be like, people do this? I'm like, people do this? So I actually think generationally as parents, I think you've kind of step back a little bit more, and I think there is more balance that I am seeing. I would just throw that when I get a parent who calls, every time they go, my child's in school, I'm so sorry. I'm like, hey, I talk to parents too. Like, it's okay. If you need to call because your kid's in school and you have a question and you want to know, it's okay to call. I will take a phone call from a parent. Not that these guys won't. I don't mean it that way. But like the apology that I'm calling for. I'm like, you don't need to apologize. Yeah. This is your child. I'm a parent. Like, it's your child. I totally get it. So don't feel like you have to apologize if you're the one calling. It's fine. We will talk to parents too.
Yeah, it's not a red flag if a parent reaches out with an email or a phone call by any means. Like, I am happy to answer. Yeah. It gets to a point once they've been accepted or once they get that decision where now there's some information that parents, like if they come to our school, parents can't call and ask about grades anymore. That communication always has to be coming from a student. And so getting into the habit of them learning how, like you said, to write those more professional sounding emails, to ask those kind of tricky or uncomfortable questions about what the school environment is like, those kinds of things, getting that practice while you're still there physically for that guidance is really helpful, so that way they feel more empowered to navigate it on their own come freshman year.
How to talk on the phone.
Yeah, well, they don't know how to do that.
How to answer a phone.
I'd also say just big picture, like love them, support them, and trust them, right? Yeah. I would say if any of these students are graduating from Dover-Sherborn High School, they have all of the abilities they need to complete a college application. Like, it's not rocket science. I know we talk about it in society like it's this like giant scary thing. It's really not hard. It just takes time and energy, right? Yeah. And that's where I think parents can be helpful in making sure that they're hitting the milestones on the way there. It doesn't mean that they need to finish the college application by July 1st of their, between junior and senior year. Like, that's a little aggressive, but, making sure if they want to be done by, a January 1st deadline, making sure that they're appropriately hitting the marks on the way there, right? So helping with those executive functioning skills a little bit, because here and there, our students still need a little bit of a push from home, but not that big. I think that there comes a time, and this is a great time, where it's time to let go a little bit, and I promise you, they're capable.
I think it's good, too, to keep in mind, like, you can remind your students it's okay to change their minds. I transferred twice. Yeah. Because where I went at first, I thought I was going to love it, and then after about a year, I just didn't. I didn't fit in there the way I wanted to. I wasn't getting what I wanted out of my academics, and I felt so bad about giving up and quitting. And my parents had to just sit me down and remind me, it's okay if what you wanted changed. Let's find what works now for you as you are currently. So I think having that in mind as well will really help.
I think we have time for a couple more.
Okay. I want to ask a question about essays. So these days, it seems like increasing emphasis on essays, and we know some families get extra help, pay thousands of dollars for improving essays, and it seems like an endless effort to try to perfect it. Yeah. I want to hear from the essay readers firsthand. How do you think about that? And what do you actually see a difference, or is it too much of stress and meaningless effort into that? I want to hear your perspective.
I think it is a wasted opportunity if you overhandle an essay, including with AI. And we've told kids this back and forth. I don't want to speak for everybody. I'm sure we all maneuvered our essay. We have supplemental essay topics, and we maneuvered them completely because we knew AI was coming. And so we tried to make them as personal as possible so that it couldn't be AI generated. But before all of that, there were college consultants who were helping you do all of this. And I always say, you can tell a 40-year-old versus a 17-year-old. You can. Voice matters. Voice matters more than anything in writing your essay. You are missing an opportunity to tell a different part of your story that I don't get anywhere else. Yeah. And to the question earlier about how do you make decisions when you don't have SATs or what, and when a lot of your kids are incredibly talented academically, it is the story I am hearing from somebody. And not that they have to have a story that is traumatic or, powerful. I mean, some of the best essays I've ever read are about minute things. I would say, like,
those are my favorite.
Yeah, they're the best. They are the best, because I actually get to see somebody in a totally different light than I do in the rest of their application. So I always say to kids, talk to me, write to me.
Yeah.
They want their unique point of view, which can't come from another person
Or
and can't
AI.
come from a computer.
Yeah.
That being said, like, spell check it, but you know, like, read it out loud to make it sure it makes sense and sounds good. But like,
Exactly.
we really do genuinely want to get to know your students and get to see a glimpse into their mind and their personalities that we don't get from the rest of their application. And so that essay, any of those supplemental questions, are that space for them to do so, to show us their personality a little bit, those kinds of things.
And just, I would say, careful consideration about the topic of the essay too. And as you mentioned, like, that is, I say, the biggest missed opportunity in their application is when they haven't told us something kind of new or unique or different about them that we're not getting from all the other parts. So it kills me when, like, all the activities are like hockey, club hockey, hockey coach, and then the essay is hockey, and I'm just like, ugh, like, and it could be a well-written essay, and it could depend on the viewpoint. I'm not going to totally poo-poo, the athletic essays. They're not my favorite, but I mean, you can do it in a different and unique way, but also think about how many other students are writing that very similar essay. So doesn't have to be I cured cancer, but like, just try and think about what's something else about us that you want us to know and use that space.
I think to that point too, the essay doesn't have to be about the worst possible thing that's happened in your life, and it can be about that. Sometimes that is the most crucial part to your life that you do want to share with us, but it could be about a random story when you were 10 years old, walking down the street on vacation. It could be something as little as that, and just hearing the student's voice is really important, because while not all students interview, it's a way for us to get to know that student on a more personal level. So I think whether it is sharing that really hard time you went through, or sharing the time you got a yo-yo for the first time, like anything really that just helps us get to know that student is really, really fun.
And I don't know about you all, but I can think back 15 years at this point to like some of my favorite essays that I've ever read. It's like a piece, right? Like, I remember Drew from Omaha, Nebraska, writing about working at a Taco Bell. I can remember Timothy from North Attleboro or North Reading, not sure, writing about fish and how he worked at the aquarium. I remember Abby from Dover-Sherborn, who worked at the Sherborn Peace Abbey, right? Like, there are these things that I can remember, and this is, for me, 15 years out, and I'm just thinking about it as we're talking, right? And that is a piece that can make it really come alive.
Yeah.
And if you're not writing it yourself, it's not gonna, right?
Or too many people have touched it and edited it,
Yes.
and then it's not your voice
Then it
anymore.
becomes something else.
Yeah. All right. Other. Yep.
Under what kind of circumstance would you recommend a college coach to have?
I think college is expensive enough. I don't think you need to, personally, candidly.
So my take is that everything a college coach can do, the student has available to them for, well, not for $0 because we all pay taxes, but already built in. The places where I think sometimes a college coach can be helpful for certain families and certain students is that, I can't meet with every student every single week, right? I do not have the time to meet with everybody every week. And if you are a student who really needs those touch points, and that is the only place that they're going to be able to get that, or if in like a family situation, it is, whenever mom and dad ask about college, it is like fight, and like being able to have that other person kind of be that sort of intermediary. Like, I get it, and I understand why for some people that can be really helpful.
What do you think about the athletes, though? I'm just like.
I do. I think our coaches do a nice job too.
I know, but I'm just like, the D1 world is becoming insanely.
Yeah, so I think there are certain areas like athletics where I think it can be helpful to have somebody sort of who lives that world.
I mean, that's very specific.
Yeah,
just,
I mean, a little bit with like if you are auditioning, if you want to be in like a theater program or like fine arts potentially.
I think it's funny, the people that use coaches the most are the people that live in towns that have the best school systems.
100%. That happens all the time.
So I think that's like, it's comical to us, like, especially those that have been doing it. Like, this is a really good school system, and students are really prepared. They have great touch points.
We do know what we're doing.
Yeah. So it's just always funny. Like, I can always tell when some of my students are working with them, and then I look up what school they're with or what town they're in, and I'm just, it makes me laugh. But So I think you can trust the system here, and your students will be fine.
Yeah, great.
All right, I think we got a couple more minutes. Actually, you've already had a question, so we'll go over here.
So, what if your child's life is outside of school? My son does rugby, but that's not part of school. He does scout. What you're talking about doesn't reflect half of his life. His teachers won't know that half of his life, or that he used to live in China or whatever. So what do you do in that case? How do you see that? Because you're not getting references from his rugby or his karate coaches who've known him for 10 years.
We could.
If you wanted to.
Love to see
And I
that.
know nothing about the process, as you can tell by my
No, definitely. We love reading applications. I always tell kids, ask someone who knows you in more than one aspect. As a teacher, make sure they know you as a person too, not just a student. Ask a coach, happily have a rugby coach write a recommendation. They know your kid in a athletic side and as a person. So anytime they know you in more than one area, those are always the best to read because they can speak highly of your student.
Yeah, and by that same token, if your student has a job, they can ask their boss, they can ask a community member, a religious leader, any of those people who can speak to who they are as a person in the community that they are a part of. Absolutely. Like, we do kind of discourage parents, just because you are a little biased from writing recommendation letters. However, anyone else that can speak to who your child is as a student and or community member and or athlete or employee, any of those things, that's absolutely one of those ways for us to see that. There are also quite a few spaces in most of the school's applications to talk about things that happen outside of school. So your extracurricular activities, those don't just have to be school-related activities. That's anything your student spends their time doing outside of the high school classroom. Same thing with their essay, all those kinds of things. We can get those bits and pieces from all of that.
And guidance counselor. Guidance counselor. I just asked, I'm like, do you sit down with these kids? And so, yeah, I mean, that's a good spot for these guys can write about
so
that too.
we'll talk to every student one-on-one several times throughout the process for sure. And if there's some way that if a student says, I don't know how to fit this in somewhere, in my own words, I will put that in. The last question I ask every senior as they're leaving is there anything you'd like me to add that you can't figure out how to put in your application in some way, shape, or form? So that's something that, I would advise that student, come on in whenever, right? Start junior year and tell me about rugby. And that's really neat. I don't play rugby. I don't really know anything about rugby, but I can learn about rugby, right? And that's the sort of stuff we want these relationships. And sometimes for me, the college essay process is my favorite part of my job because it's the time that students finally need me in a way that I want to be needed. And maybe that's a little bit selfish of me, but it really is they're finally letting me in on some parts of their story that I may not know because it is outside of school. And the earlier they can let me know some of that stuff, the more enjoyable my job becomes. But also, then I can start to develop that relationship and know, hey, even on a Friday, be how was your rugby game this weekend? And that's a nice thing for me to do as a person that works in a school and with that student, right? So get to know the people too.
Yeah, and if schools offer interviews like we do, I don't talk a lot about academics, honestly, during my interviews. Don't tell my boss. But I want to hear about what they're passionate about or what they've been involved with. And a school like us is 100% community service. Come on down, scouting. I want to hear all about it. So there are other places we will want to hear that information.
Awesome. So I do think that we do have to wrap it up because the library is going to kick us out. But I want to say a huge thank you to our panel. This was incredible. Also, a thanks to all of you for coming and attending, and a thanks to the central office and the superintendent for helping us put this on tonight, or putting it on for us.
Can I say one thing?
Oh, sure, of
Can
course.
I tie a bow around this? I just want to mention that sitting here thinking about the portrait of graduate skills that we've identified, you specifically mentioned 6 of the 7 of them tonight. Critical thinking, collaboration, communication, empathy, making mistakes and persevering, and being an engaged citizen. You didn't specifically mention creativity, but I assume you want creative kids. So that's validating to us as a school district. And when we're thinking about these portrait of a graduate skills, we've been thinking about how does that relate to how we teach in the classroom and what we teach. And obviously, Dover-Sherborn will always continue to provide a progressively rigorous program for our students because we know that's what you're looking for. But as we are moving more towards interdisciplinary learning, project-based learning, hands-on learning, that balance with assessments and homework and finding joy in the classroom, thank you for validating all of that work that we'll continue to do. So thank you all for tonight, and thank you for validating us.